Hello, folks, and welcome to Author Adjacent, a show about the journey from hobbyist writer to professional author. I'm your host, Michael Vadney. I am once again sitting here with J.L. Odom, author of the Land of Exile series and SPFBO 10 champion. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. It's been fun.
So little does everybody know, we are recording these back to back, so we had to have you back immediately because for this episode of Author Adjacent, Jamie, you suggested a subject of complex characters. My first question is, why did you choose that subject?
I think because it's something that took me a long time to figure out. And once I did figure it out, and I say figured out, I'm sure I have a lot to learn yet. But once I started understanding how to craft my characters in a way that made them come alive, it was such an exciting revelation. And every time I work on it and every time I put in the time and effort to do that, it gets better and better and more exciting. And it's something I also just think about a lot. When I watch a show, I'm like, that's bad characterization. Why did they do that? When I watch anything, listen to anything, read anything, the question of who are these people and is this consistent characterization and why am I here? Why do I care about this? And why do these people matter? It's just always in my brain at all times.
It's absolutely beautiful when you're reading a page or watching a show or a movie and you're like, these people are real. Like, this
Yep.
is not a character, this is a person.
Yep.
And creating that person, that real life interaction, is incredibly difficult. I think one of my favorite examples of it actually is East of Eden by John Steinbeck.
Such a good book.
I was floored when I read it by just how I could only just say real. They were just real people. Everybody, every character just felt so well rounded. They had such complexity, but also a lot of contradictions.
Yes, because we have those in real life. We don't always do what we say we'll do, and we don't always mean exactly what we think we mean. And adding those layers to your characters is challenging, but oh, so rewarding.
So, what would you say is the difference between a complex character and a flat character?
The most immediate question that comes to mind is probably consistency. And I know that we just said contradictions, but I don't mean consistency and they always do the same thing, but rather that when they take an action, you're like, yes, I can see them doing that, even if it's something that was a little unexpected. There's a huge difference between when you see a character do something unexpected and you're like, that makes no sense and comes out of nowhere, or they do something unexpected and you're like, oh, I wish you wouldn't have done that, but I know you, so I know that you would do that. And so there's something about getting to a level of interiority of that character where you've dug so deep down into their bones that even when they do something that shocks you, you it doesn't feel unrealistic. It feels like they could have done that if they were pushed that far, or if these things happened, they could have gone there. They could have done that. So even when they are contradictory, as we all are, there is a consistency to the way they reveal themselves as a character. They don't say something just to be quippy 1 minute, and then you're like, but they weren't humorous all the rest of the book. So where did that come from, and why was that there?
Yeah, you have to seed the evidence
Yeah.
of they are capable of this moment. Uh, there's this, I don't think I want to call it a trope, but there's this set of actions that appears in several books that I'm a huge fan of. And it's always um, the one where the guy or the woman is pushed to a point where they finally let loose, where it's just like, I've tried to be this moral, upstanding person, and you've just gone too far. And they just unleash the warrior within kind of situation. And there's a lot of situations where people go for that, but they didn't put the evidence beforehand that they were even capable of snapping like that, because everything before that is like, oh, it's just water off a duck's back kind of situation.
Yes. And that's what when a reader says it came out of nowhere, that means you didn't prepare them for that moment. And it's weird because you simultaneously want it to be a surprise and you want it to make sense at the same time, at the same exact time. You want them to go, I was afraid they would do that, but also I can't believe they did that. And So yeah, there's so that's where to me it is like the seeding element is the consistent to where they responded to this situation in this kind of way, and that tells us something about who they are. But you're also seeing these underlying things happening, and you're seeing those consistently until you see a whole new direction with that character. And yeah, so I think the other thing is a lot of times when people say, oh, you need to make your characters more complex, and we go, okay, well, just like paste on a flaw. And yes, characters need flaws, but you can tell the difference between a flaw that grew up out of the character and a flaw that was pasted on at the last minute. Like, ooh, he needs a flaw. Let me just give him one real quick.
Yeah, a lot of times flaws can feel like gimmicks.
Yes. Like, oh, they like to, yell at the, like I don't, I'm trying to think of a good one right now. Off the top of my head, I don't want to use something too generic because I'm sure like we're always trying to give this depth and complexity. But you can't just give someone, I think the old joke is the clumsiness and call it a flaw. You can't just even a temper, which is a valid one. Lots of people have tempers. I have a temper. But I can't just slap a temper on a character and call it complexity because that only tells us a little bit of something on the surface. It doesn't dig into anything else.
I think temper, I like a character with a temper, but I really like them when there's a deep reason for it.
Yes.
Like, usually there's something where it's like, this is wrong with the world,
Yeah. It
and
doesn't
they want to do something
it
about it.
doesn't live in a void. You're not just
Yes.
like it has to be naturally integrated into the other aspects of their lives.
Yeah, it's really complex. So, what is your starting point for creating a complex character? Do you start with their personality, their backstory, or a specific conflict for them? Like, how do you weave all these elements together into a cohesive whole?
So I think I usually started I mean, I say this, I am completing the only trilogy that I have written. So let's keep that in mind because I am dealing with a set of characters I've been living with for decades. So
Yes.
I do know them pretty well by now. Initially, there was a lot of it was starting a lot with backstory. Like I knew what they had been through, I knew where they had come from. I take also cultural elements really seriously. So if they come from a culture that operates like this and they've had these experiences within that culture, then those are kind of the things I start with. But if I just stayed there, it would ring very hollow because you can't be like, oh, he has a tragic backstory. The end. That's not enough because different people respond different ways to their experiences. You could have two people have the same experience and respond in completely different ways. So that is obviously insufficient. But backstory is probably one of the things I start with first because it tells me how they're going to interact with others a lot because of their culture, their environment, and their upbringing. Um, and then the other thing is, I had an experience, and this was like way, way, way back in early draft, where I was, Azatla is in some senses, especially according to his beliefs, a very like person with very strong conviction. And but I didn't want the reader to like think badly about him. Like I wanted them to like him. And I was protecting him from a lot of experiences that would have made him look bad. And a lot of reactions that would made him look a little bit grayer than I wanted him to seem. And as long as I was protecting him, giving him not plot armor, but like moral armor, so that he didn't have to do anything too concerning. Yeah. As long as that was happening, he was just flat. And even though he had all this meaningful background and all these cultural things and all this whatever background trauma experiences, all these things that I had built into him, he was just paper thin to me. And it wasn't until I was like, okay, well, I guess if you do some things that make me a little uncomfortable or or do some things that might make the reader go, oh, I don't like that about him either, like they grow maybe agree with the people who are criticizing him in the book a little bit, um, then I suddenly was free. It was like I had tied myself to this idea of how he had to appear. And then once I just said, okay, we'll just do away with that. I need to not worry about how he's perceived and just think about how he would really respond in a situation like this, and that he became a little bit harder of a character, and a little bit more ruthless than he had been once I just let go of trying to worry about how he was going to be perceived, and started to develop characteristics and traits that I didn't even expect, that now have become really the backbone of his character. But it all had me with me. I had to let go of control. I had to stop trying to make sure no one was allowed to see him the way I didn't want them to see him.
Yeah, he is presented as a bit of an underdog, and everybody loves an underdog story.
Yes, we all
Um, yeah, like his underdog status is very compelling, but his need to reevaluate his own biases also comes up frequently in the story and adds a very unique layer to his character, because he is the one that is being marginalized against in a lot of the story for his religion and his race. And then you see him doing that to someone else for different reasons, but ones that he believes is right.
do.
What inspired you to combine this classic underdog trope with such an introspective complexity?
Well, I decided to do that because first of all, I'm always doing that with myself. I'm like, I believe in like being honest with myself about the things that I'm not proud of, the things in my character that, are just not living up to my own standards. So a lot of that sort of like, I have these high standards, but whoa, it looks like I'm not living up to them at all. That's come from a lot of my own struggles in life, and a lot of my own challenging myself to be honest with myself about my own failing. But also it came from a thing where I think when we want to write stories about prejudice, oppression, these are important stories, but I think we like to oversimplify. We like to make sure that no one can say anything bad about the person being oppressed. And I understand why we do that. We do that because we're grieved that these things exist, and we don't want to make the person who's suffering into a bad character. Um because they're the ones suffering. We should love them and we should care about them. But the reality is, if, Joe Schmo over here is being oppressed, that only says what his circumstance is. It does not say anything about his character. Oppression does not create good character. It doesn't create bad character. It creates all kinds of characters. And so I wanted to explore the nuances of something that we often like to simplify because it makes us feel better to be like the bad guys are always very clearly bad and the good guys are always oppressed, and this is very clear cut and we can all understand it and it reads easy in a children's book. But the reality is that we are often, when bad things happen to us, we don't always respond the right way. And we don't always have the kind of character that we would wish we would have in those circumstances. We are not guaranteed good character merely because terrible things happen to us or because people treat us terribly. And so I wanted to explore the fact that Azatla could be someone who wants to do what's right, believes, has strong convictions, but is not by any means guaranteed to have like a perfect character just because he's mistreated. And because I just think that's, you see all kinds. You see people handle mistreatment graciously and bravely, and you see them handle it horribly and shamefully. I mean, you see everything.
Wow. That was a very real answer. Like that's more than just writing. That's life. And
And that's where the good characters from the life.
well, yeah, yeah, we were just talking about that. Like, God, yeah, it's really just like taking real life lessons, real life observations, and just putting them to the page. But that is an incredibly complex process for creating incredibly complex people, because it takes a lot of, I think, understanding of yourself, but also just understanding of people in general.
Yeah. And recognize, and I think there's a phrase, a traditional phrase, there but for the grace of God go I. And the whole point of that phrase is that somebody doing something awful where you have two reactions. You can have that. You can have that, oh my gosh, I would never do that. I'm at least that makes me a good person because they did bad stuff. Or you can see that and go, what circumstances, situations, failings would lead me down that road. And if you take the latter, you're going to have be a much more empathetic writer. Your villains are going to be so much more interesting, um, because you actually empathize with them, and you're like, "Ooh, I mean, it's awful, and they're evil for sure, but here's how I could have got there with my own selfishness or my own whatever, you know." And if you imagine yourself as, it sounds bad to say this, but it's like if you imagine yourself as capable of the things you see that are terrible, then you're able to see how people get there. Instead of just saying, "Oh, look, it's too far for me. I couldn't imagine ever being there." Well, hopefully most of us never do go there ever. But if you can't say, "Well, maybe I could. And if I could, what would cause me to go there? And how would that happen?" And if you can do that, you're going to have much richer, I that's how I get richer characters, is by going, how would I turn into that person? What would push me to that direction?
I'm going to make an observation that is based on nothing other than just my thoughts. But I wonder if that is part of the reason, the ability to create complex characters because of emotional intelligence or emotional understanding of those situations. That I wonder, because of all that, that is why authors who tend to be successful are ones that are a little older, that are in their like 30s, 40s, and 50s, because they've had so much life experience and exposure to just not just a range of emotions, but a
No,
range of causes of those emotions and
exactly.
complex situations.
I agree with that. And I think that the reaction people can sometimes have when you say, "Oh, well, when you're older and mature, you can write better," is they'll go, "No, young people can write too, and they can, and they should. Start writing right now. Write as soon as you
Yes.
can, and write everything you can, and you'll just get better and better." But
Yes.
I do agree that with a certain level of maturity comes the kind of humility that enables you to approach things with that kind of nuance, that kind of subtlety, and even that kind of graciousness that enables you to look someone, a character that's just doing terrible things, and still have that little bit of like love for them, even though they're wrong. They're so wrong, but you still love them because you wish they wouldn't do it. You wish they wouldn't, and you have compassion for that terrible person that you just made up. So I think that maturity and experience really helps cultivate humility, and I think humility is really helpful for crafting characters because you never think you're far away from them, you dive into them.
I don't know if this is going to be true for all writers, all authors, or even all characters, but I do believe that in a lot of major characters, when you are writing, you put a little bit of yourself into that character. And when you have that breadth of experience with dealing with happiness and tragedy and sadness and joy and just all these things, you have more pieces to pull from to yourself into that character.
Absolutely. I think that when I think about me writing it 15 years ago or 18 years ago or whenever it was, and then when I started doing the revisions and going through it, I mean, there are things in these books that are in there now that could not have been in there 15 years ago when I wrote the original version, because there were life experiences I hadn't had, things I didn't understand, levels of maturity I hadn't experienced. And like 20 years from now, I'll probably write something I could never write now. So
Yeah, that's really what I would say to like young writers, that, like you were saying, start now, because you'll get that experience, you'll get that talent of like knowing how to write properly. And you may produce some quality work that people will really enjoy. But if you're that good now, you're going to be so good in 20 years.
exactly. Just get started now.
Yeah.
And know
I think that's,
you'll
oh,
grow.
go ahead.
Yeah, know that you'll grow.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people that I've talked to, especially who waited much later in life to write, a lot of them do wish they started sooner and taking it seriously sooner. I know that is the case for myself. I know you had a lot of things going on with your life before you started taking it seriously. Do you think you picked the right moment to like jump into these complex characters?
Some things, you can't control, and you just look back and you go, that works out. I had no say in it. But I mean, I started writing it, like I said, when I was in the military. And so while I didn't necessarily have a lot of maturity, I did have some pretty mature experiences for a 19-year-old. And I was deploying. I was in a very unique environment, and my job was, translation and also to understand the culture that I was in, which you send a 20, well, I was by the thing, my first deployment I was 21 or 22, I don't remember. And you send a kid into an environment like that, and I had so much, my eyes just opened to so many experiences and so many different cultures and so many different, like, people living all these different ways and all these different conflicts and all these different layers and all these different nuances. And obviously I didn't understand it all, but I was drinking it in. And it was, I think youth is a very fertile and productive time. Like, as you get older, you kind of slow down a little bit and contemplate a little bit more. But at that time, everything's just bursting and flowing. So it's good that I was beginning it in a time where I had that, just sort of wide-eyed youth, and just taking everything in and drinking everything in and learning from everything in a bit of a fire hose fashion, more than you can take in. But then over time, as it steeped and matured, I could refine it and flesh it out. So I think I'm glad that I was in the midst of those very unique experiences when I started writing it, because they were very influential to what I decided to write and how I decided to write, and I couldn't have done without them. But I am also glad that it came to fruition at a later season in life. So I was able to enrich it in a way that I couldn't possibly have done at that time.
Very honest answer. I appreciate that. So, what techniques then do you use to ensure that characters like Azetla remain relatable and authentic, even though they are grappling with these morally gray decisions along with like societal rejection?
I think with him, it's a little bit tricky because he is the underdog. So you kind of have this immediate buy in even before you know who he is. As soon as someone's an underdog, you're almost like, well, I'm on their side. But then they better act right, or you just get irritated, I guess. So for with him, he's probably the character I had to grapple with the most, because on one hand, because he's a very religious character and he has very strong convictions, he could come across as, like, people might not like that. People might be like, well, I don't care. That's not something I can relate to. If you don't understand what it's like to have a religion, or that's just not something you're interested in, that can be distancing. So I had to give lots of opportunities for him to relate in other ways. Like, that's where there's a military, there's usually like some element where either you've had an experience of being in like a community, like a military, where you have this band of brothers or that kind of thing. And sometimes you experience feeling welcomed in, and other times you feel pushed aside. So that's something I think a lot of people can relate to. Like, do I belong or do I not belong? So you give some things that people can resonate with, but you don't back down on the things they might not resonate with. Like, you hold your ground. So, some of his character traits, some of his beliefs, some of his ideas are ones that I think aren't necessarily going to appeal to everybody. But I held to those while still trying to give plenty of opportunities to see um the sort of depths of grief or struggle or discomfort or uncertainty that he experiences, even when he doesn't express that on the surface, if he's keeping it tamped down, and kind of trying to hold it together. So that's one thing that I think, because there were times where I was like, oh, I think some people aren't going to relate to this element of his character, and you get a little nervous, but my idea is hold your ground. Unless you literally know it's the wrong move and you're like, actually, that's stupid. But if you're like, this is what I wanted to say, this is what I came here to do, hold your ground and don't back down. And just make sure you're providing other opportunities to relate to them in a different way if one of the ways is not going to work for everybody. And that's okay, because we are not, none of us work like that. There are going to be areas where if I want to talk about like some elements of my life that somebody else is like, I cannot connect to that. That makes no sense to me. I mean, that's just reality. So I've got to find a way to connect them somewhere else.
Yeah, and that's part of what makes them complex characters
Yeah.
is like there are bits about them you don't like.
Yeah, exactly. And I hope that there will always be at least one time in my story where someone says, I'm very frustrated with this character, or I disagree with this character. I don't like how they approach this, even if they're like the good guy. I would hope that at least once you're like irritated with them in the same way that you would be irritated with a friend or a sibling or someone in real life who's doing something you don't like.
I'm sure everybody is thinking of that person right now.
Like, yeah.
Sorry to do that to you, viewer. So then what strategies do you use to try to balance that character's internal struggles with their external actions to make them feel realized?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I think that that is gonna be different for each character, actually. So, for Azella, he's a more stoic, like, he doesn't like he's not someone who's gonna just run around screaming every time something bad happens to him. He's gonna kinda keep it to himself. And so what that means is that I have to, um, make sure that it's kind of like when you have a split screen, you're watching a movie and there's split screen and they're showing two sides. That's I have to do that with him all the time. Like what he's saying are these, more straightforward or calmer things. And sometimes what's going on inside, depending on the circumstance, is going to be like almost even the opposite of what he's saying. In other circumstances, the interior might reflect the exterior. He might be calm on the outside, calm on the inside, and that's fine. But there are other times where try to make sure that I think we tend to want the verbal to match the interior. So if they're feeling really explosive inside, we let them talk very explosively. But that if that's not consistent with the character, if the character is someone who is very restrained, then we have to you have to do your split screen. You show what's going on inside them every now and then intermixed with what they're doing outside, which looks very little like what's going on inside. Um, I think Azella is a tricky one simply because he is a more stoic character. I have other characters that are um don't work like that at all. they're what they might just be lying to the entire time. And what's going on in their interior is also not particularly honest. So, you kind of have to that's going to be a character by character story for me. Like what do I want to say about this particular person? I'll say that in the book, and this I would avoid spoilers, but this regards a more spoilery character. I with a one particular character, I spent the majority of the book, you only see them from the outside. Um, and you don't get to see what they're thinking and what they're feeling for a long time. And to me, that forced us to one relate to the people who were looking at the character a certain way and agree with them because we didn't have anything to the contrary. But then also it meant that um all you had to go on as the reader is what you see. You don't get to know what they think or how they feel. And to me, that's a very intriguing thing because you have to spend a lot of time trying to figure it out and trying to understand. And then when you finally do get a little hint of it, it's like, oh, this is maybe that's not at all what you thought. And and it puts the reader in the position of the character. We also didn't know what was going on in that person's head. We also don't know what they're really thinking and feeling. We're also a little confused. So we all get to do it together, readers and characters.
It kind of reflects what we were talking about earlier with like making them more real too, because like in real life, we do not always outwardly express the thing that we are feeling inside,
Yes.
especially when we're like angry or frustrated with people. Like sometimes you realize, that person does not deserve my frustration. So you give them a smile, but inside you are seething.
Yes. You just walk away. Yeah, and we don't get to experience people, and that's actually why I mean, I did multi POV because I feel like even if you don't use all the POVs, like let's say you wrote a bunch of them and you ended up discarding half of them, doesn't matter. That told you so much. It told you so much about what's going on in people's heads. And in this case, one of the things I really like about multi POV is when you get to see someone else's perspective on someone you already know, and it's kind of like when, you know, your friend is talking about your sibling and you're like, I did not know that you saw them like that. Oh, that is not at all how we relate. Oh, that is a very different perspective on that person than I have. And I loved that's one of my favorite ways to both develop character and also just as a writer show character is to show someone from an unusual angle. and an angle that you might not sympathize with or relate to typically, but make you sympathize or relate to it so that you can then go, oh, I mean, I like that guy, but from this perspective, yeah, I guess he is kind of a jerk. Like, oh, maybe I was wrong. I love that. I love it when a book does that for me. I love it when I can pull it off in a book because I want to always be challenged in what I think and have somebody pull the rug out from under me and say, "Oh, you thought wrong."
Exactly one of my favorite things where you've established, especially when it's a POV character
Yeah.
where like internally you know all of their insecurities, their goods, their bads because you've been hanging out with them in their POV for a lot of the story. And then you have this other POV character and then they finally meet and you get that reaction to each other which is nothing like it's been presented to like you or the conclusions you have come up with.
Yep.
Oh,
It's the
it's
best.
mwah.
It's so good. It's so
Mhm.
good. Because that it, like, almost takes the not takes the place, but rep is same as a battle scene. It's like that it's that exciting to see this shattering of your perceptions. You're like, it's as good as a battle scene if it's good, if it's well done.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's a lot of what makes a complex character good is that very careful handling and layering where it's both consistent but inevitable.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I love that. Yeah. And I think one of the other things that I do, and this is more of an external thing, not when I'm actually writing, but just kind of like the atmospherics that influence character development for me,
Mhm.
is I find that a lot of classics are really helpful because they are so character driven. They're
They're
low
so
action,
good.
high character, right? And we have a tendency, I think, I mean, I do sometimes. I worry, I'm like, oh, this is a really quiet character scene. I wonder if someone's going to be like, where's the battle? Like, I love battle scenes, but you got to balance it, right? And so, but in the classics, it's like they don't care. They're like, I will describe this building for 100 pages, and then I will
Mhm.
give you the deepest insight into this character for the next 300, and nothing else
Yep.
is going to happen. And I think that while we sometimes have trouble with that when we get like a little impatient or a little frustrated, ultimately the character studies that you're dealing with, I mean, that's all we're doing, pure character study. And so I think that that's very influential to me when I think of books like the Brothers Karamazov or like some of those really like deep character drama type classics. So I had written some
Yeah.
down. Oh, Kristen Lavren's daughter, that's historical fiction, Middlemarch. They're just like it's solely focused on the tiny interior complex motivations of individuals in very normal circumstances.
Yep.
And that is helpful because then it kind of takes you out from feeling like it all has to be all the big action and the big drama and the trauma and the angst that it is pushing everything. You can actually start with that small thing, and that's okay. And it's okay to at least work with that for a little while. And then you can get back to all the drama and all the big stuff. So
Yeah. I
that's
think that's something that a lot of like big epic fantasy does kind of like smooth over and pass over and forget to include into their stories. But it's that balance between like the big epic conflict and the little internal conflicts, that balance
exactly.
between the two.
And we
That
want
again,
both. We want both.
yes, yes.
Give me both.
Again, all of that comes together to add to the complexity of the character and the complexity of just the plot and the story that you're in without really adding much. Like you don't have to add a bunch of volume to
Yeah.
make it complex. You just have to take a few real things and see how they conflict.
Exactly. Exactly. I was thinking this is a kind of a weird one, but so I've been reading the Gulag Archipelago lately. Very slowly. It's like 3 volumes this thick each. So bit by bit. But the point is, there's this one scene in the Gulag Archipelago where he's talking about because this is Solzhenitsyn's account of all this. He took papers, he did interviews to find out about all these different people who had been in the gulags. And he's talking about transport and how they're on these transports and they don't want to let them give them water because then they have to let them out to go to the bathroom, and then you've got to observe 100%. It's inconvenient, it's hard work, and so they just treat them worse while they're in transport because of convenience. And while I was reading that, I was like, when I go on a road trip with my 5 children, I feel the same way. I don't wanna stop and go to the bathroom. I don't wanna get you another water. I don't want to get you another snack because then you're just gonna wanna stop again. And I was like, I just related to some of the most evil people in history. This is very uncomfortable. And then immediately after, I was like, nope, this is useful. I can work with this. I can learn how to write how someone treats others like this for mere convenience because I've experienced it when I didn't want to stop to let my kids go to the bathroom.
That is a very positive way to look at difficult and maybe sometimes a little petty situations. But yeah, what you were saying though actually reminds me of a very recent conversation that I was very blessed to have with Brent Weeks over on X like a few days ago. Someone had posted about his book, and I just commented on it because like I'm a big Brent Weeks fan. I really like his Lightbringer series. His Night Angel series, I only read the first book, and I cautioned the original poster because it's like it's a good book, but it does have some very difficult themes that to deal with. And Brent Weeks came in and he joined the conversation. And first I was like, whoa. And he said, yeah, I was thinking about these difficult themes a lot because they had come up in my life. And I use these books to kind of process them because I think it's a good way to present it to people and show them the real sides of these without them having to experience it. And that's really what we want as both readers and writers is not necessarily bad things, but we want to experience lives outside of our own. That's why we write, that's why we read. And it just really like blew my mind. I never thought of it that way. I always just thought, "Oh, that's in a book. I don't really like reading that in a book." And it completely changed my perspective.
Yeah, and I think and that is absolutely true because sometimes you'll read something and it could be very dark, it'd be very difficult, but you never know when that's going to strike someone in the very moment that they need it. And where they're like, okay, someone has been through this, or someone has a glimmer, even a very, a lot of books are very dark, but even a glimmer of like a hope or a way through or a way out, or at least a different way of looking at something that I haven't figured out how to look at this. And man, if my stories do that for someone, that's all I need. Like, what else could there be? You know, if you write a book and then someone says this resonated with me and helped me process something and helped me see something, helped me understand something, and gave me courage or gave me, you know, resilience in a hard season. I mean, there what else could there be than that?
Yeah. I can't think of how many stories that I've read where I learned real life lessons from what the characters were going through, either what they said or just decisions that they made. And it bringing it back to the subject, it's always because the character felt real to me,
Yeah.
because their experiences felt real to me.
Yep.
And so I could, in a secondary fashion, experience what they were going through and
Yep.
gain some understanding into my own life.
Exactly. And I love that. When a book does that, that's, it goes into the all time when it does that for me.
Yeah. I think that's a big reason why like the Way of Kings and the Stormlight Archives is just so popular is just because it has like really good life lessons in it.
Mhm.
And while the characters sometimes are not the most complex, they do resonate with a lot of people with the experiences that they have and then share with the reader.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that's why we're here. That's
Yeah.
wow, man.
Ugh, that's really good. So, how do you craft dialogue and interactions for characters to reveal those inconsistencies? You talked about it a little bit before with Azetla. It's what he is expressing is not always the same thing as what he is feeling on the inside.
Yep.
But how do you do that without the evolution or path that the character is on feeling forced?
Man, that is such a good question. So for me, some of it has come from patience and longevity. I've been with these characters for a long time. Definitely in my first iterations, I wouldn't say they had that same complexity or consistency to them. In fact, that's one of the things that is making the writing of book 3 right now so challenging is that these characters have grown and matured to such a degree that going back to that original draft, I'm like, what? Um, who are these people? Because that was patience. It was time. Is sometimes I had to set it down and walk away and just be like, I don't know how this person would respond to this. And if I didn't know, I know some people can move on and just keep writing and then go back to it, but for me that's a breaking point because I have to know if I don't know how they'll respond to this situation, then I'm stuck until because then there's going to be 5 other situations coming out and then I'm not going to know how they respond to those situations either. And so for me, I have to take pauses. I have to stop and I have to really process. And sometimes it's a real pause, like, okay, I can't write until I anything until I figure this out. Because if I don't know how they would respond to this one person who hurt them or this one person with whom they have this really weird, you know, complex, discouraging relationship or whatever the situation is, if I don't know how they respond to that now, then I I don't know who they are. And that means there's a layer to them that I haven't discovered yet. And so especially when it comes to dialogue, that's actually a really really helpful way for me to learn about character is through dialogue because you don't talk the same to everyone. You interact with people differently. With some people you're very tempered, you're very measured, and with other people you're very free and very comfortable and you say all the stupid stuff that you wouldn't say to those other people. And so, how you interact with each individual person is in each time, even if it's just a stupid conversation that isn't like a big drama deal, is revealing character. So, if he makes jokes with this guy, but never with this guy, like that tells you something. And or if they react a little bit tense to a specific topic. I'm like, oh, well, now I know they have a very different view about that topic than everyone else does. And so every moment of dialogue is an opportunity to pause and know something new about my character. And then once I've done that, I get to take that. Then you've got a hold to it. Then you don't get to just go, oh, I gave them that one bit of dialogue. It sounded so clever, but it was not consistent with their character. You know, I think sometimes we sacrifice consistency for a good quip or for like a really like good clapback. And and I get it because I'm like, oh, oh my gosh, that's so good. But would they say that? And if they wouldn't, you can't do it. Because then you've sacrificed their consistency for getting them to say a cool line that you like. And I had to do that. Oh, I've had to do it. I'm like, oh, I love that line so much, but she would never say that.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's exactly what "kill your darlings"
Yes.
means.
So I think for me, I pause a lot with dialogue. I'm not sitting here just tappity tappity tapping. I am pausing and going, but would he really say that? Especially if they're feeling this. So I have to just like it's almost like I have to stop and they take the character by the shoulders and go, okay, before you say these next 3 words, what are you really thinking? How do you
Mhm.
really feel? Would you really say that? And am I just doing this to get the information out that I wanted to present in this conversation? And if I can feel like I'm starting to contrive, scrap. It's gone. Can't happen. So because
Well, that explains it, though. Like,
yes.
"By Blood, by Salt," we were talking about it in the previous episode. It's not a thick book. Like, it's a decent size. It's like a little over 100,000 words, I believe, like
Yes,
110?
112. Yep.
Yeah. So it's 112,000 words, but it is a lean 112. Like, there is no fat in it.
I'm so happy to hear you say that. You remember that the literary agency said cut 10K and I didn't make it. I cut 6K.
Ooh, it's still pretty
But
good.
I tried.
Like 6,000 words from,
Oh,
118? That's
it
a
hurt.
lot.
She was right. She was right.
Yep. I'm going through the editing process right now, and like I'm getting chapters back, and I'm like, I don't like it, but this is better.
Yeah. Well, and it's nice that when you do send it off and you have that rest. And when you get the rest, it can sometimes, especially the longer the rest is. I mean, sometimes I had years rest. I'm not saying everybody has to do that. But,
Mhm.
if you have those rest periods when you come back, you have kind of fresh eyes and you will see those that you're like, oh, okay, I like this, but it does not need to be here because it's actually not, it's in, and you can't see that if you don't have that step back and that pause. I'm a
Yep.
big fan of patience. It's also why it takes me so long to do everything, which is, that's
Fair.
not everybody wants to be that quite that slow. It's fair, but I think patience really serves character development because um we don't rush through just to get to the action. We stop and think about the characters and we go, what who are we dealing with here?
Hmm.
Why is this person making this choice? And if we so for me it's a lot of stopping and thinking.
No, that
Very
makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
Like, I'm in that break right now. Like I said, it's off to the editor. So I'm in that process of I'm already looking at my next book and what it's going to be about and who the characters are. And I'm really deep in that world building and character creation stage to figure out like, all right, who are these people? Why are they here?
Yep.
Why are they doing all of this? So this entire conversation, um I've been thinking a lot about like, how can I apply this to this new character that I'm trying to build like right now?
You're always
This is
out
super
there
helpful.
getting the scraps. What's this good advice? What did you say? Please tell me how to do this. I'm the same
Yes.
way. I like my ears perk up. I'm like, what you did what to help refine your world building and your characters? Oh, good. Yes.
Yes.
Take.
Uh, I will selfishly admit that part of the reason I started this show was to learn from people and get
That's a
all of that
fantastic reason.
information.
That's a fantastic reason because not only do you get the benefit of it, so does everybody else. So I think that's fantastic. Yeah.
It's for you, viewer. I do think we are coming up on time though. This episode and the previous episode, these conversations have been spectacular. I know I like, keep saying it through both of them. Thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank
Uh,
you for
please,
having me.
of course, please take a moment. Tell the people where can they find you, where can they find your books, and what have you been working on lately?
All right, so you can get the books in kind of all the usual places like Amazon, Kobo, Barnes and Noble, all that jazz. But you can also buy signed copies through my website, which is jlodomauthor.com. And I'm on Instagram and I post about what I'm reading and what I'm doing and book updates and sometimes what I made for dinner. I mean, it's pretty eclectic, but it's mostly book stuff. Um and what I'm working on right now is the third and final book in my Land of Exile trilogy. So the first is By Blood by Salt, the second is A Haunt for Jackals, which came out in February, and the third one, all things being equal, as long as I can slog through these challenges that I've been mentioning, will be in 2026. And I don't have a title for it yet. So, it's untitled.
Well, it's still super exciting. I'll definitely be keeping an eye out for it. I need to get to the Haunt for Jackals soon. Uh, Again, thank you so much for coming onto the show. And folks, until next time, I'm just so flabbergasted by how good this has been. I forgot my sign off. So you guys have a good one. Oh, man.
Awesome.
Yeah, that